In this video, I'm talking all about day for night, and I've got two setups of two different methods that I really enjoy to use for day for night scenes. The first method is the best method. This is definitely the way to do it as long as you don't see windows or other external light fixtures in your scene. This is blacking out. You just black out all of the daylight. You just put up curtains. You negate all of the daylight that comes into a space, and then you just light your scene. Nobody will know any different because there's no reason for them to know any different. You just convince the audience that this is most certainly shot at night. This method works extremely well in smaller spaces. It's very easy to black out one or two windows. It becomes very hard to black out a bunch of windows in a very large space. But if it's a small space, just black everything out. It's so much easier. And as long as you don't show the audience any kind of window, you don't have to deal with it. That's when things become complicated, because then you need to black out the light hitting the window and put some external light fixtures out there during the day when the sun is at its most powerful. It becomes harder to sell. If you can shrink your shots and avoid shooting into windows and just black out everything and then light from a lamp or light from a TV, it becomes very easy to do a day for night. The first things I always do are look at the scene critically and see where natural light exists, or where I might be able to make light motivate from or exist from. Are there lamps? Are there windows? Are there TVs? Anything like that. Start there, because then you can kind of get rid of some thinking. You can just be like, well, there's a lamp, so we can key from it. We can hair light from it. We can use it as visual interest. Once it's set up, you can see everything. You can see your practicals. You can see what's in the frame. You got to see what you're dealing with. When you're dealing with day for night, it's good to have this set so you can see where the ambient light comes in. In my case, there's a lot of daylight coming in behind camera onto the subject, and from behind the subject where camera's left, just pushing in. So I have to get rid of all of that. I gotta reduce that to a level that I can control. And then the other thing I'm looking at is this lamp. This lamp in the background I want to make use of. I don't think I want it to be my key light. I think I'm gonna do an off-screen TV as my key light, but this light is in the shot, so I gotta do something with it. So first, I black out all the windows. You can see it's not even the best job. There's still plenty of light kind of coming in, but the space is pretty large, and on camera it's not being seen, so I'm not gonna stress over it. I don't have enough blackout material to get rid of every single inch. And for the blackout materials, you're gonna wanna use something that really doesn't let light in. You really need something that's just super opaque and is just not letting anything in. I'm a big fan of the $20 two-pack gray blackout curtains from Amazon. They're not great negative fills because they're gray, but they're excellent blackout material, and they're $20, and they're like 3 by 6 feet maybe, or something, 3 by 5 feet. And plus, I see that the lamp is a little too bright, and because it's not on a dimmer, I'm gonna have to knock this down with exposure. So after I put a stop of ND on, all that ambient just kind of gets crushed down into the shadows, and again, I'm not worried about it. And now I have a shot that's ready to be worked with. So after knocking the exposure down, I've gotten to a point where I need to balance the image. And balance is a great term to learn. It's a great term to use. It really just means that everything in that image is balanced to feel correct. Bright things are still bright, but they're not overexposed. Dark things are still dark, but they're not underexposed. And the entire image as a whole fits within the dynamic range of your camera. That's where your images start to excel. Really, a lot of baseline cinematography, baseline practice is reducing all of the exposure values in your scene to fit within the dynamic range of your camera. That's where cinematic images are born. So now that I have this, I gotta balance the scene to that level. Everything's too dark, which means I have to bring lights in to bring it all up. Before I get to the key light, I'm gonna start with the backlight. The backlight is going to be a P60C, and that's just going to be tungsten warmth, nice and orange, and that's gonna be pushing some of the light from that lamp onto the subject to enhance the presence of the lamp. The lamp's not gonna key light in this scenario, it's just going to cast a nice backlight, and that's gonna help separate the subject as well as tie in kind of everything that we're looking at. And I always like to work from the back of the image to the front, because sometimes it's hard to see what you're doing in the background, or how much impact the key light is making, how much spill it's introducing, if you don't start with the backlight first. Because once you get that background, you're like, oh, that's nice and dark, those shadows are nice and clean and interesting, and there's no competing colors back there. And then if you slap the key light and you're like, oh, what is all this like strange blue or this strange light in my background, it's pretty easy to tell that it was from the key light, and you just need to kind of suffocate the key light a little bit so that you could stop that light. So after working from the backlights, I could see a very nice separation. I could still see a lot of very good detail in my shadows. It's a nice, crisp image. I just need to get the key light. And I know I'm gonna do the key light with a AMRAM P60C, and it's going to be pretty close to the subject to get like a little bit of softness. But again, TVs, you know, when you watch them at your home, are usually a decent size. I mean, most modern TVs that people are buying are 40 or 50 or even 60 inches. So it's a decent soft source because of its size, but because of its proximity, it's not usually the softest source. So I don't want to have a really big source close to my subject casting a soft light, because that's not super realistic for a TV. So I'm going to pick something on the smaller side and bring it kind of close to kind of balance out those qualities like I was describing. It's a smaller source. So if I put it too far away, the light's gonna be too hard, but if I put it too close, it's still gonna be too soft. So I just had to find a place where this P60C makes sense to cast a key light TV key light, a light that's coming from the TV. And that bad boy is going to be on the TV mode at a decent pace. I like to have it actually register on camera, so I like the TV to be fast, or the effect to be fast, so that it's constantly changing. And that's just going to be, you know, just off to the subject, far side key, so I can maintain some of that shadow side towards the camera. And that's it. That's all I needed to do for this shot. And this is the method of blacking out everything and making the image controllable. There's so little ambience that my lights feel like everything. They feel like all the light in the scene. It doesn't feel like there's something else competing for the space. The second method, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is using daylight sources to your advantage. This is something you implement when there's just no way to avoid the daylight. So the first thing I'm gonna do is spin that white balance to a level that makes daylight feel like night. So I changed the white balance. So what I have is the camera's rated at like, I don't know, 2600 Kelvin maybe, and that makes all the daylight in the scene appear to be very, very blue. And this is the same method that old Hollywood used to use, and it's part of the reason why we kind of associate moonlight to be blue, or why when we see it in movies we're like, oh yeah, that's right. Even though in reality it's not really the case. It's not that kind of blue. It's still bluish, but it's not that kind of blue. Not like the blue you see in The Thing or a lot of other Hollywood movies. Once I do that, I still do need to black out what's hitting my subject so I can replace it with some light that's much more convincing. And I do need to try and reduce the overall exposure in the room a little bit so that it has that like dark type exposure. It doesn't feel like everything's lit. So I need to reduce the overall exposure a little bit. And I'm gonna do that by blacking out the windows to subject's right, camera's left, a decent amount, as much as I can with the resources I have. And that reduces everything to feel a little bit more moonlighty. It's still not the best, but as long as the daylight direction of light kind of all goes one way and it isn't too bright on camera, it'll work. We can get by. It'll be convincing enough. The problem with this method is that you can really only employ it on cloudy days. You could get away with it on sunny days, but then you'll run into the same problems that you have working with daylight anyway. You know, clouds coming in and blocking light and changing exposure values, and the position of the sun changing and the shadows changing throughout the day. That's all still going to be a problem for you if you're doing this. It won't magically fix those problems. And again, in most scenarios, you're gonna want to do something that gives you control. But if you can't, and this is what you're left with, this is the method you're gonna wanna try. And so for the key light, after I have some of this backed in, for the key light, I'm going to use an Intelitech Mega 6FC. This thing is an awesome light, and there's a couple reasons why I picked it. It's an RGBW fixture, which basically means that I can get it to be any kind of blue that I need. I'm gonna do it via Kelvin temperature and not via RGB or HSI, because those are gonna be too saturated and they're not gonna blend with the daylight I have to use. So I'm just gonna put the fixture to be a similar color temperature that I'm getting in the space. So like 6500, 6800, something that's like a cloudy daylight. The other reason why I'm using the Intelitech Mega 6FC is because it is very large, and in the eye of the subject, it literally looks like a window. So it's a really convincing eye light as well as a light fixture as a whole, because it looks like a window. The next thing I want to do after getting that Mega 6 FC is bring in some negative fill, and that's to kind of reduce the exposure, kind of like I was saying earlier, that it just feels a little too lit. Feels like there's a little too much light in here for it to be at night, you know, truly at night. So after getting the negative fill in, it definitely reduces the exposure on the shadow side of the subject's face, which kind of helps to sell the idea just a little bit more. And the last thing I wanted to do was get a hair light of some sort that kind of pushes from the Christmas tree all the way up to the subject. And I'm going to do that with just a 4-foot RGB tube, and that's going to be the color most dominantly seen from that tree is red. So I feel like it works. I feel like it's interesting for the shot. So that's it. That's it for the two methods of doing day for night, where you shoot night scenes intended to be presented as shot at night, but you shoot them during the day. The first method, blacking everything out, you know, you scale that up and you scale that down for the space and what resources you have, but that's the best method. Do that, gain control of the ambience, and make the scene your own. Really control, really have influence over the lights and what is seen and what it goes to shadows. That's the way to do it. But if you're in a scenario where you can't do that, and you need to get some sort of night, try spinning the white balance, try reducing kind of the ambience in the room to be even enough that you can kind of convince the audience that the blue they're seeing is not daylight and it's actually moonlight. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.